In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed.
This is a day of great hope for all Americans.
Did you ever think this would happen?
The historic and revolutionary transformation of a totalitarian dictatorship and the liberation of its people.
To a day even historians may have trouble describing.
It was the farthest thing in my mind.
The end of the old Soviet Union.
As a nuclear superpower, the breakup of their territory throughout Eurasia scattered vast amounts of nuclear technology among the fledgling former republics. This turning point in nuclear control created a paradigm shift, placing policies and people in the middle of the fallout. At the height of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a nuclear arms race for global domination.
Each increase of tension has produced an increase of arms. Each increase of arms has produced an increase of tension.
The sheer number of nuclear weapons that each side possessed meant that any aggression between the two powers would result in
mutual assured destruction. If we could assure the Russians that we could destroy 20% of their people, this would deter them from starting a nuclear war.
Though locked in an arms race, the existence of these two nuclear superpowers allowed for a structured approach to regulating nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union took part in various treaties that enforced nuclear non-proliferation by limiting testing, use, and further development of nuclear weapons. The iron fist of the United States and the Soviet Union created a successful central body that reduced the spread of nuclear weapons. Simultaneously, throughout its lifetime, the Soviet Union had designed and built more than 60 civilian reactors, many scattered throughout its satellite nations. Over time, Soviet nuclear reactors started to degrade. Additionally, the designs of these nuclear reactors were known to be flawed and expected to last only 30 to 40 years. Once the Soviet Union fell, this would create a disarray in management, creating a curtain of neglect. Due to economic pressures in the 1980s, the Soviet Union shifted their focus away from the care of these nuclear reactors. Many of these reactors started to decay and became increasingly dangerous. Chernobyl was a prime example of the dangerous potential of Soviet nuclear reactors.
Without enough control rods in place, without any effective automatic shutdown systems operating,
the sheer amount of radiation released would eventually lead to thousands of deaths, including first responders and those living in the area at the time. These dangers were exacerbated by the disorganization and neglect by the Soviets in the cleanup in the aftermath. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, it was evident that there was a lack of control, communication, and care for dangerous nuclear reactors. This posed many questions. Who would control these aging and dangerous reactors? How would countries communicate to create policies to deal with these unregulated reactors? Who would care for these reactors by funding their maintenance? These dangerous reactors became scattered throughout the former Soviet republics. Despite the risks, the decentralized control over these reactors led to countries that are reliant on Soviet-era technologies continuing to operate them. As a result, many dangerous reactors still continue to operate even today. As anticipated, many former Soviet satellites did not have the money nor the desire to take financial responsibility to properly maintain this antiquated technology. Consequently, as these reactors continued to age, radioactive materials started to seep into and contaminate the environment. Nobody wanted the job to deal with such a sweeping problem and ignored the signs that a fallout could be possible. In disasters such as Chernobyl, countries were left to pay huge costs to finance the cleanup. Without proper funding, Chernobyl caused a severe environmental catastrophe. International organizations such as the IAEA had to be called upon as the fallout did not stay within a geographic border. Despite international efforts, the responsibility for Chernobyl continues to be contested.
Many concerns and fears exist about immediate and long-term effects of Chernobyl fallout.
The level of contamination was so dangerous that a full containment vessel was needed to protect the region from continual fallout. This was not completed until 2016, after intervention by international groups recognized the magnitude of the problem. This turning point after the Soviet collapse left unanswered questions about the long-term plan to care for these Soviet-era reactors, to pay for their maintenance, and the concern for their longevity when they are already on borrowed time. In the New World Order, who steps up to fill the void of a former nuclear superpower? The collapse of the Soviet Union also left a nuclear power vacuum, causing fear over the control and proliferation of weapons technology, creating a curtain of terror. By 1991, the Soviet Union owned more than 45,000 nuclear weapons. When it collapsed and dissolved into 15 sovereign states, all of their nuclear weapons were left in the hands of uncertain leaders. Weapons were scattered throughout the former republics, leaving control decentralized. There was no ability to directly communicate with the Kremlin, like the days of the Cold War brinkmanship. In an instant, the number of nuclear states dramatically rose, creating a turning point for the unregulated and dangerous international nuclear black market, where rogue terrorist states have access and the cash to buy themselves nuclear weapons.
Weapons of mass destruction may someday fall into the hands of international terrorists.
Nothing could be more central to the security of the United States than ensuring that nuclear weapons don't fall into the hands of rogue nations or terrorist groups.
Thieves hired traffickers who sold radioactive materials to buyers in North Korea, Kazakhstan, and several Middle Eastern states.
Investigators found this, uranium. It could be used to make a radioactive dirty bomb.
As a result, the threat of nuclear proliferation continues to rise each day, with several countries poised to become nuclear weapons capable in the near future. The collapse of the Soviet Union also marked a turning point in the care and management of former nuclear testing sites. The Semipalatinsk nuclear test site in Kazakhstan is still scarred by the effects of massive nuclear blasts, with more than 400 nuclear tests conducted in the area. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site was immediately closed due to high radioactivity, leaving many internally displaced, creating a humanitarian crisis. This region, like Chernobyl and countless others, have become radioactive wastelands. The centralized Soviet state is no longer around to take the blame or care for the mess they created. Once the Soviet Union dissolved, the red phone dissolved along with it. This turning point severed a vital link of communication between nuclear powers to prevent catastrophic nuclear war. In 1994, the Budapest Memorandum attempted to decrease this threat by removing large amounts of former Soviet nuclear weapons in countries such as Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. Despite this attempt at stable non-proliferation, it failed. This is evident in 2022 when Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, using Belarus as a staging ground. To make matters worse, Russia has continually threatened the use of nuclear weapons on Ukraine.
К этому готовы. Мы действительно готовы к ядерной войне. Они у нас постоянно находятся.
As well as place pressures on an already vulnerable former Soviet nuclear infrastructure within Ukraine. The collapse of the Soviet Union was a turning point that left nuclear technologies decaying in former Soviet states. The responsibility for care, control, and communication surrounding the use and maintenance of weapons and reactors was contested by international countries and organizations frightened over the fallout.
I'll make enough.
This new nuclear age calls into question: who has their hand on the button?